The Empowering Tools channel presents the Empath Council. The council is made up of empaths who are committed to nurturing the skill of empathy through knowledge and discussion. Are you ready to be more empathetic and use self-compassion as a basis for a more empowered life? This is the place for you. Welcome to the Empath Council. We're glad you're here.
The first thing that I wanted to just mention very quickly, Guy Winch has this incredible book all about healing a broken heart. And one of the things that he talks about is when we have these moments where we do things against ourselves. And so that is part of what led to this discussion today, but also that Catherine Schultz has been in my brain, in my heart, around me, whispering things to me for the past, I would say 15 years, because I had this roommate that was just addicted to her. And this roommate taught me about Catherine Schultz and taught me about the phrase, we must work to actively combat our inductive biases. And the simpler way to say that is all of us have things that hypnotize us and lull us into a false sense of security about our lives and about each other and about the stories that we understand about each other. And what Catherine was saying is we have to get comfortable with being wrong about each other, with being wrong about ourselves, with being wrong about our lives. And the reason that we have to do that is because that is one of the most empathetic things that you can do. Because if you can be wrong about someone else's motives, or if you are wrong about someone else's motives, and then that motive comes back to you and you go, oh my gosh, I was wrong about that. That is the very definition of empathy. And she, in her book, talks about this, and we will post those links below. So that has been on my brain a whole lot. And really where this came from was recently I was watching something, and a candidate that I voted for president is now doing something that I'm not happy with. And I was listening to him talk, and I thought, this is a time where I'm going to have to rearrange my wrongness, which is something that Catherine talks about. So we're going to link the TED Talk that we are going to reference today, because we're going to pull out some quotes. And I want to start with the question, what can empaths do? And I'm specifically specifically referencing empaths. Gosh. Well, that frog's gone. I'm going to start with the question, what can empaths do to apply empathy to others when the empaths themselves are wrong? And the reason that I'm going to reference this is because I think that empaths get trapped in an emotion cycle where we're like, oh my gosh, if I'm wrong, that is going to hurt them. And then we get stuck in this space of feeling like we are horrible people because we have been wrong. And there's that empathy thing that we do where we feel about and for and through and around and hold space for people, and we do all of that. So in its way, there is this stuckness that comes when you're an empath and you are wrong about someone, and that is so tricky to get through, and that can be painful and difficult. And I just want to address that in the context of what Catherine Schultz has been talking about. Now, we didn't read the book as part of this. I can reference the book and reference quotes and pull that out. We watched the TED Talk. So that is what we are referencing when we talk about this. But I'm also hoping that the collective experience on this, call right now is astounding. So I would really like to reference that experience as well and pull in other understanding. So that is what we're addressing to start. And then we're going to go on to what can empaths do to apply empathy to themselves when they are wrong. And Lindsay, thank you for that reminder. The Guy Winch book title is How to Heal a Broken Heart. And it's when he talks about things, he talks about things in the context of what you can do about a broken heart. So many people philosophize about a broken heart, but Guy Winch was the first person to talk about it in the context of first aid. He also has a TED Talk, I'll link that below, where he talks about that first aid. It's a shortened version of the book, but I highly recommend the book in concert with the Catherine Schultz book. I will link both of those below. So, we're going to start with what can empaths do to apply empathy to others when empaths are wrong? So we're going to start with that question. All right, who wants to start us off?
Okay, wait, I just want to clarify the question so I can get it right in my head. Mm-hmm. What can we do to apply empathy to others when the empath is wrong.
Yes.
Like us, the empath?
Us, the empaths. And
like,
I know
wrong about what we thought they might be feeling.
What we thought they might be feeling, their motives, what they intended, all of those things. That a lot of the conflict that we experience in our lives comes from misappropriation and motivation. So if we can reassign that and understand that, that's something that we can actually answer.
I want other people to answer first because I'm still like digesting the question.
Okay, and I don't want the question to be like a big trip up thing. What I'm trying to do is get to a point, because a lot of times that feeling, and this just doesn't just come from an anecdotal experience of mine. This comes from interacting with empaths in many different locations, many different places, where they shame themselves for not being empathetic enough. And so I want to talk through that path of like, how do I apply empathy when I'm wrong? And how do I, and then immediately following that, how do I apply empathy to myself when I have been wrong? And, matching both of those things. And we're going to address this topic again another day, where we talk about non-empathetic communication and how to address that with being wrong. Right now, I am assuming that both people in the conversation are empathetic. We just witnessed two empaths having a negotiation. That was quite hilarious. That's something you get to see in the Patreon. We'll put it there. But the idea is that empathetic communication includes an element of, realizing that you're wrong, and then having that moment where you're like, oh my gosh, I was wrong. And then that, that panic that ensues, or the feeling that you failed, or all of those things. So I want to address that, because what Catherine talks about in this is not, she coolly addresses this without a lot of emotion. Even though she talks about the emotion, it's never really something that she addresses how you deal with it. And that's where I feel like the Guy Winch book comes in to supplement. So, but I know all of you have experience in supplemental information as well.
Mm-hmm. I have an example that I can share.
Brilliant.
Let me just get this out of the way so I can see better. Okay. So this was when I was not reading the other person correctly. And I'm going to say too that a lot of times with feeling empathy with someone, we don't necessarily like zero in on the exact emotion that they're feeling right away. It takes some question asking and stuff a lot of times to like really hone in on what it is. And this particular day, I didn't feel like doing any perception checking and finding out what was really happening. And so this person and I had gotten into like a little bit of an argument, and they came downstairs and were like, kind of, when you're in a bad mood and you're just like, things get placed on the counter louder, and doors get shut a little bit harder, And so I read that as she's still annoyed or mad or irritated or feeling something along the anger, emotion.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to ask questions because I didn't want to get into that conversation that day. I just wanted to go upstairs and be away from it. And so I did that. And she asked me, she was like, hey, wait, can you come back down here? And then she attempted to do, she didn't just attempt, but she did some of the communication process from vocab from Claire Canfield. And she was expressing what she was happening, what was experiencing, what she was experiencing. Oh my gosh, I cannot talk.
Good job.
She was expressing what she was experiencing. And in that, I said, well, this is what I saw. And I didn't do perception checking even then. I just said, this is what I saw. I didn't like ask, is it this? Was it this? Or was it this? To like give some options. And I also didn't ask for clarification later. Again, because I didn't feel like it. I knew in my head, like, I know this, like, I was like, the steps to take. So why aren't you doing it? I didn't feel like doing it. I was irritated. I wasn't in the space to do it. And so I listened and I answered the questions that she had. And then I was like, I still want to go away from this. I don't want to be in this space.
Right.
Anyway, so as someone who teaches and studies empathy and compassion, I do this to myself a lot where I'm like, you know this stuff. Why aren't you doing it? Like, why do you need to practice what you preach? Like, this is some of the stuff that goes through my mind. So self-compassion comes in then later when I'm like, you know what? I might be an empath. And also, I cannot be an empath 24/7. It's fatigue comes in with that.
Yes.
And so the self-compassion and the self-care also are really important to come into play there. And so to answer that part of your question, Kate, about like what happens when we start to shame ourselves or, speak negatively to and about ourselves. Like I was doing, like, this stuff. Why aren't you doing it? Like, this is something that you could actually implement fairly well. Why aren't you doing it? Well, because sometimes I'm a human too, and I have emotions too, and I don't want to always be empathetic all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I'm saying. It can
Yeah.
it can get exhausting, and we need to be gentle with ourselves and kind to ourselves so that self-compassion can really come in,
Yeah.
where we take the time to be kind to ourselves, to be mindful, and to remember that we're human and we are fallible. And
Mm-hmm.
to your point with the TED Talk that we watched, that we can be wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So long story short, I got her signs wrong, like her nonverbal communication. I got it wrong. It wasn't about me. She was doing those things, but it was about something else. And I took it to be about me. And so I was wrong. So then, I get in my head too about like, well, I was wrong about that. I picked up on the wrong signs, or I attributed them to myself because I was still in my head about the argument. Like, so I had some stuff up going on my own, so I wasn't able to read the room correctly.
Yeah. Yeah. So I just wanted, to your point about, really quickly, I want to reference spoons, that we had a brilliant discussion about spoons. I will link the spoons below, the spoons discussion, so we can talk about that. The other thing, this sounds like an odd thing to talk about when we're going to talk about being wrong and empathy and all of that, but I just want to reiterate, I know we've discussed this before, but I want to mention it again. Willpower is actually a pool of chemicals in our brain. It's like a gas tank. It's not a muscle as previously suspected. I don't know what the 1950s did to our brains to help us think that like willpower is this muscle that we just build up over time. It's not. It is literally a pool of chemicals that can be completely depleted to the point that we have no ability to use it. From willpower comes all of our motivation and all of our confidence. So if we have no motivation, no confidence, and no willpower, there's no way we are going to enter an argument with any amount of empathy, because empathy is the intersection of all three of those things. So, Lindsay, to the self-compassion that you're talking about, more than self-compassion, it's like going to get fuel before you take a long trip. Like if you're going to get in a car and drive to the Grand Canyon, you better stop for gas, or you're just going to be on the side of the road cursing yourself going, I run a freaking gas station. How do I not have gas? Like, and to me, that's what you were saying when you're like, I have empathy. I know this stuff. It's not about shaming though. There are times where I think sometimes I think that we almost want to judge ourselves superhuman. I don't know if anybody else does this, but I think, I'm strong. I got this. Okay. I'm totally fine. I can go like 200 miles on nothing. And then I get to the nothing and I'm like, yeah, maybe I should have stopped for gas. Okay. Other thoughts? I wanted to speak to that really quickly, but other thoughts.
My share experience, I'm sorry to get personal as well. So last week, something similar, kind of not similar to Lindsay's story, but something similar happened where I, kind of talking about what you're saying, I have over the past year had an amount of my emotional gas tank with some family members has been sort of low. And it's hard in the middle of a pandemic, because I think when you see people a little bit more frequently, you're able to sort of fill that gas tank and fill that reservoir and establish those connections and those relationships. Even amidst some of these harder things, it kind of like smooths out the bumps and allows you to have a better foundation for your relationship. And sometimes when you don't get to see people, you only have these bumps that are happening, right? And so it's a little bit difficult to have that emotional gas tank really full or ready to deal with some of these continued bumps, right, that come up. So last week, a bump came up with a family member, and it was over a little financial thing that was not something that, I mean, we never have issues about financial things in my family, but it was this weird thing. And I was like, I can't even like deal with this, because I don't want to even deal with this person. But it came up, and then I was like so determined. I was like, no, I had kept records, and I went back through and I looked at all of my things, and I'm like, keep a budget and each month and all these different things. And I said, yeah, sure, I'll take a look at it. Like, I'll for sure. In my communication with this person, it was very pleasant and good. But in my mind, I was like, there's no way I'm wrong. There's no way this could have happened. And then I was speaking with my husband, and he's like, oh, well, you know what? There was this conversation I had with this person, and we had this conversation and this agreement. And I was like, huh? So all of a sudden, and I was like, my kind of like what I had thought was resolved may not be. We're still kind of looking into it and trying to figure it out. But all of a sudden I was like so mad at myself and so like self-loathing, because I was like, why did I judge this person? Or why am I like doing this? Why am I being frustrated? And I wasn't really showing empathy. And then all of a sudden I was getting so overwhelmed and overworked over this silly little thing. And it was because my emotional reservoir was really not filled. And also because I might, and I still don't know yet, but I could very possibly have been wrong. And then there's this embarrassment of like, oh, well, that should have been taken care of like a decade ago. And maybe we wouldn't have done these other things that we were like. It's embarrassing if someone's watching you spend money and they may owe you, I was like, totally like, this is a horrible thing. And it was interesting how I kind of didn't understand why I was getting so sad or mad about this. And then the next day I was trying to help my son practice piano, and he does really well when he has like a schedule, and he does really well if he just wakes up in the morning and he practices before he goes to school. And he's done that for years, but this past year has kind of been an odd year. And so he hasn't really done that. And so this year he came home from school, and it was a battle multiple times a day. And finally, and he said he did it and he hadn't. And finally I was sitting down at the piano with him, and he was freaking out. He was like so mad and like to tears, and it was like over the top. And I just sat down with him, and I had an epiphany that was, sometimes when I like happened just the day before, sometimes when something happens where I recognize I'm at fault, I can become even more emotional or angry in the situation, because part of that anger or emotion is actually should actually be self-directed, but it shouldn't be, but it sort of is part of it, but then it kind of comes out. And so I said to him in a way that was so easy for me to finally understand, was that I can tell that, this is hard, and I know that right now you don't want to do this. And I can also tell that maybe you're frustrated with yourself, not just with me or the piano, but maybe you're frustrated with yourself because you don't have the freedom to go and do what you want until this gets done. And it was a realization for me that we sometimes in these situations put so much pressure and self demeaning, like these feelings of anger towards ourselves, and we can't even recognize that we're doing that, but it can cause the situation to not be as positive. And so I guess my comment on this is, when you recognize that you possibly could be wrong, or that you made a mistake or whatever, sometimes that emotion stacking, I'm really good at emotion stacking where I recognize this and then I like put this layer of guilt and this layer of anger and whatever on and turns into this like sandwich is like, I can't eat this. So instead, if we can recognize that and say, okay, this happened. I could be wrong, or I am wrong, or I made a mistake, or whatever it is. And yet I can still try to find an opportunity for empathy for myself or for someone else and give myself just a little pause. That helped me to finally, with him, see that I could do better in that way.
I love that. So I have two thoughts on that as you are talking. I'm remembering that quote from Anne of Green Gables. It's actually in the third book. Anne is in college and she has a roommate. Her roommate is Philippa, and Philippa hasn't made very good choices about her dating life. So Philippa comes to Anne and she confesses that her dating life is a mess. She has accepted 2 proposals and she doesn't know what to do with herself. And Anne says, "Oh, Philippa." And Philippa says, "Don't you feel sorry for me?" And Anne says, "How can I feel sorry for you when you've done this to yourself?" And Philippa goes, "Well, that's the time I need you to feel sorry for me the most." So ever since then, I have thought about that as like a life philosophy that like when we do it to ourselves, that's actually when we need the most empathy and feeling sorry and pity and, all of those things that when we do it to ourselves because we can help it, it actually makes it worse sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing that I have been thinking a lot about lately is the transactional nature of our emotions. That once again, I am going to decry the Victorian era of our culturalization here, because the Victorian era gave us this thing where we believe that if a sin is committed, it must be paid for. And so if a sin is committed, we also feel guilt. So sin, guilt, punishment, or retribution, or paying the price for it, right? So if we feel guilt, we feel the need to apply a retribution or punishment somewhere. We cannot imagine that the guilt comes up because not a sin was committed, but because we were incorrect. And incorrect is not a sin. It says that in the Bible thousands of times. So I don't know how it is that these Victorians can get this wrong, that being incorrect versus doing incorrect, those are 2 different things. And the Bible goes into all sorts of things, even within the Mosaic law, that there are things that you can be wrong without committing sin. And so Becki, as you were talking, I noticed that sort of balance again, where we do that to ourselves, where we say, okay, I was wrong, therefore I deserve a punishment. I was wrong, therefore I have to pay the price for this. And we pay the price by like making ourselves feel guilty or something, when really, if we were to just see that as the guilt is there to remind me that I need to examine this behavior so that I can do better in the future.
Mm-hmm.
How will I react to myself?
Yeah. And I think that happens all the time as mothers. I don't know if anyone else feels this, but for the longest time, young kids, when I was trying to get them out of the house, I'd be like, let's go. We got to get out of the house. We're late.
Monster mom.
Yes, I would turn into a monster mom and I'd be sitting in the car and I'm like, why do I feel this way? Like, why aren't they getting ready? And then I was like, well, actually, Beck, if you would have just gently started a little bit earlier, they're kids. They don't get this, so be patient with them and be patient with yourself, because there's a lot going on, so I think that mom guilt sometimes creeps up on a frequent basis where you're like, I should have just done this better and and it's like, put it away.
I had a therapist demonstrate this to me, and I don't know if this will be helpful to anyone else, and I don't know if it will work for anyone else. This is spaghetti. We're going to toss it on the wall, see if it sticks. If it sticks for you, great. If it doesn't, fine, it falls off. Okay, so here it is. Therapist said, it's not always easy to stop an emotion in its tracks, but it is a lot easier to let go of emotion than we think it is. She said, the next time you start feeling that guilt, and it's wrapping around you and clawing at your neck and you're seething and you've got all this guilt and you're like freaking out because you're like, oh my gosh, I was so wrong. And now I feel all this guilt and, like all of those physical things that you have. She said, imagine cradling that guilt and giving it up to the Humane Society for Guilt. Okay. Because it can just take that guilt. Someone else can adopt that, or it can live there and be put down by humane people who know how to do that. But this imaginary like metaphor of letting that go and being able to say, I am just going to give this up for a time. And usually that would come with, but if I give it up, I will not learn. And so then my therapist pointed out, if you learn the thing, then you don't need the guilt. So learn the thing and then let the guilt go. And I thought, oh, you mean emotion's a teacher? And when I learn the thing, the teacher goes, wait, is emotion like Mary Poppins? Like emotion like stays here and then goes away when the wind changes because you learned the thing? Is that it? Like she's like, yes,
Emotion,
okay. So
emotion equals Mary Poppins. I love that.
So I love the idea though that we can let guilt go. That once we learn the thing, we can let that go. And pity and regret and all of those other emotions that go with being wrong. And again, like I mentioned, sometimes we throw spaghetti at the wall and it doesn't stick for you because maybe you have something that you need to resolve too, or maybe that emotion, you experience it differently. You know, I'm not saying that everyone will have this, but for me, that was really helpful. Okay. I want to hear from other people.
Okay, I got to speak to this for a second because I am a recovering perfectionist who hates to be wrong so much.
None of us know what that's like.
Right? But I'm trying, and I have been trying for some time to be better about it. And so what the approach that I've taken with my children, I'm like, if I can teach my children better, then maybe that will help because I learn when I teach. So here's the example that I'm going to give. I have 2 kids. They are 8 and 3. And I have been a snowboarder for many a year. And when my family moved to Utah about 3 years ago, my husband was like, I think it'd be fun to learn how to snowboard. And so we decided it would become a family affair and we would all go and learn how to snowboard. And it was, and still is, very entertaining, right? Because you have me who used to snowboard and is like trying to remember how to do it. And I'm now a mom with like bad knees and it's hilarious, right? And so I'm a little stiff going down the mountain, but my husband and my daughter have picked up on it really quick. And one of the things that we did it from the very beginning and still do is we celebrate how many times we fall. We talk really quick about like falling is not a bad thing. Falling means you learned another way not to stand up on your snowboard. And that's fabulous. And so we would have competitions to see who could fall down the most, not on purpose, right? That was like the game that we played is like, you're going to do a run and you're going to count how many times you fall. And we're going to celebrate every one of them. And so anytime we'd be going down, you know, whether it was the bunny slope or just one of the nice little green runs or whatever, somebody would fall and it was like, yes, you fell. That's fantastic. Let's get up and try to do it again.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm. Growth mindset.
Changed the whole experience.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because then it was, I mean, we laugh about falls. We'll do somersaults down the mountain and it's hysterical. You know, I mean, we've ripped pants, we've lost gloves, we've done the whole, like, it's been a mess. And we are giant people wearing big, bright colors on the mountain. Like, we do not blend in, but we still go and we're having a blast. And it's this safe space to fail, right? It's this safe space to be wrong, right? It's me who has more experience snowboarding than anybody else, catching a toe edge and laughing about it. Whereas before that would be like the most humiliating thing in the world because I feel like, oh, I know how to snowboard. I have to stay up on my snowboard, right? But now it's like, yes, I fell too. This is fantastic. And that has trickled into the rest of our lives, right? Uh-huh. That idea has trickled into the rest of our lives of like, hey, you messed up on a test? That's awesome, right? Oh, you got yelled at work? Fabulous. Oh, you overbilled a client on accident? You know what? That's wonderful. Like you learn how to recover. And instead of saying, oh, I suck for being wrong, you have this opportunity to show empathy to yourself, right? And to say, I learned that I can get out of these really yucky, gross filling situations and be okay. Yeah. And it's incredible. I've had opportunities in my own business and my own life, you know, different things where it's like, oh, I really, really messed up. You know, I have hurt people's feelings completely unintentionally. I blew it. Mm-hmm. I'm having a human experience. This is fantastic. How are we going to recover from this? Right. And it sucks. Mm-hmm. It sucks so, so much. But every time I come back to that, rolling down the hill on a snowboard, right? Like, or, you know, we had an experience snowboarding, just my husband and I, a couple weeks ago. His binding broke at the very top of a run. It was our last run of the night. His binding broke. Now, my husband is a giant human being. There was a ton of fresh powder. He's on this huge snowboard, and his binding like literally fell off of his snowboard. It was attached to his boot still, but off of his board.
Yikes.
And so we just started laughing. He sat down on a snowboard and he sledded down the hill. And it was so much fun. And I thought, okay, that's it, right? That is making lemonade out of lemons. So I've had a couple experiences over the last few weeks where I think, well, my binding fell off my snowboard. What am I going to do? Right. Or, and it's that metaphor that I keep coming back to, because for me, that became our safe space to fail. And so I think that if you are one who, like me, struggles with this, find a space where you can fail and celebrate it. And that starts to trickle into the rest of your life.
Yeah. Two questions that I had that I want to pose now, and not to supersede anyone else's thoughts. If you want to share things, let's keep these questions for either, later in the discussion or another time. One, is there a difference between being wrong and failing? And two, can someone be wrong and still be a good, right person? Is this to do with personhood? Like, is being wrong to do with actions and things like that? Or is being wrong to do with like your very personhood?
So
I heard Dianna start that. I was like, Dianna's going to join us.
No, all of this is tying in with something that came to me after I was listening to a number of you. And yes, obviously I think the obvious answer is it's okay to be wrong, and being wrong is not an indication of we're good or bad. There's no good or bad, so, and being wrong and failing, I don't know. So I don't know if I can answer that question, but if I can kind of tie in a little bit, the thing that came to mind is the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. And it's a really fascinating thing. When I didn't see it this way, when I was, like working with sponsors and things like that, but that it was actually a part of an addict's recovery to have the awareness, to gain awareness of mistakes, of being wrong, and then have it. Well, I'll just read these steps and you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Okay. We admitted to God, to ourselves, to another human being, the exact nature of our wrongs. Okay. We were entirely ready to have God remove all of these defects of character. You talked about giving way and letting go of, the anger, the emotion, things like that. Humbly asked him to remove our shortcomings. We made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. And step 9 is make direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. And then step 10 is to continue personal inventory. So like what I'm hearing here, and what I think is wonderful, you going back to, you were talking about guilt. And I don't like the word guilt anymore, but I do like the word awareness. When we recognize, yes, I was wrong about this, or something I did, caused harm to someone, or, and I know it's a very difficult, it's a different thing when it has something to do with the impact it has on someone, or the impact it has on a relationship. Falling off of, I love this story about the snowboarding, but like, you're not harming anybody when you fall, you just fell on your own.
I have been run over by a snowboard.
Oh, okay. That can harm someone. Okay.
But I know, but your
it's important to have that awareness. But that going back to like Lindsay's story and Becki's story is, as we gain awareness and hopefully have compassion with ourselves, recognizing that our tank was running low and maybe we didn't, honestly, you talk about family, and I won't open that can of worms. So my tank is very low right now. And with regards to certain relationships, and it's super humbling. And every day I wake up and go, am I ready? No, I'm not. It's where we are right now. But I pray that the time will come, and to do what I can to do some little damage control.
You're weeping. I like that.
Those relationships. But it's okay to have that awareness, and we should be merciful with ourselves, be gentle with ourselves. We will mess up, and it isn't the end of the world. Like you said, it is a tremendous learning opportunity. And we are, as my therapist would always say, this is probably a Brene Brown thing, we're wired for struggle. this is a mess. We're thrown into the train wreck. It's going to be a mess. We're going to be a hot mess a good percentage of the time. And then the most important thing we can do, hopefully, is gain an awareness. I love that. Isn't that humbling to, that like, a bunch of addicts get into a room and we're all like, we need to recover. And what's one of the first things we do is we recognize there's a power greater than us. We can't, and we have to admit that we're powerless over a ton of things. Powerlessness is like one of the first steps of recovery. And then before long, it's awareness, self-awareness, looking forward, taking our inventory, but not in an abusive way, but acknowledging things. And when possible, restitution, and hopefully doing what we can to, and I'll finish with this thought, doing what we can to repair the relationship. Kate knows about this, but long story short, I was in a situation once where somebody I cared about and I were both put into a terribly inconvenient situation where our, scheduling thing, and we ended up colliding. And unfortunately, the relationship really never recovered. And I, looking back on it now, I did my part, and I'm not saying this to be cruel to that person, but I did, the full story. I did my part to be aware of my shortcomings, and I genuinely apologize for the ways that I didn't handle it well. And I let them know that I cared, and it never really took ownership of their part. And at the end of the day, there was nothing we could do about it, and it just, I had to let go of it. But, when possible, whatever we can, when we can do our part, that accountability, we can try to repair relationships, and we can have compassion. And maybe she just doesn't have it in her. Like, going back to that individual, they just don't have it in them right now to take ownership of that. Maybe that was really hard for them. It probably was. So I want to have compassion and empathy for that her gas tank was pretty low in that area, and go, okay, it is what it is. At the end of the day, just be kind and patient. We're all a hot mess. And that's really cool. It's kind of fun. Isn't it kind of amazing that all these hot messes can get on the earth and create beautiful things and have relationships and have good memories and joy? Like, it's just kind of cool.
Because of our hot messery.
Out of our
I like how you were talking about the higher power, and you indicated, and then having the light in the corner became apparent as to why we had that today. Okay. So first of all, well done, theater queen, with the lighting. Second of all, I just want to mention learning. I have thought a lot about this learning, and what Lindsay said right up front, where she was like, I'm an empath. I know this. I teach this. Why aren't I doing this? And there's that question there. And I want to say that I started teaching standardized tests, how to raise your test score on like ACT and SAT stuff. And I was working with a group of high schoolers. One high schooler comes to me. She is a 4.1 student. She has earned such spectacular grades that the school has had to grade her above the 4.0 based on this. Everything else in her life is amazing. She does like all these incredible things. She's sitting in front of me, and we have one lesson where I teach her how to do the process of creating a system and a routine to answer each question, because that is the main problem on SAT and ACT. It's not content. It's never content. It's the tricks the SAT and the ACT uses, right? So I'm teaching her this routine for how to take this test. And I think she's going to learn this like one session. What am I going to teach the rest of these sessions? How am I going to do this? And here's this just exceptionally gifted, she is freaking 15 years old. And I'm thinking, she's got this down. She's totally fine. And the next session we come back and she goes, Kate, I have to tell you, I'm so sorry. I don't remember a single thing we talked about last time. And I was like, of course you don't. You have so much going on. You had come from a game. You were headed into a rehearsal. Like, it makes perfect sense to me that you would have issues with that. But inside, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's why we have, repeated tutoring where I'm going to teach her this over and over and over again. So Dianna, when you mentioned that learning, I would really like all of us to just recognize nobody learns something on the first try. There is no way that if you took me out snowboarding today that I would have any clue what the crap I was doing. And please don't take me out snow. That's just a bad idea. But, like, even if I wanted to, and even if there was that available, I think I would still really struggle, and I think that it might take a long time. And, maybe, I don't know, I took 20 years to learn how to play the piano, and it took me, a good 15 years to learn how to sing. And, there's all these things that it's taken us so much to learn that I think we don't give ourselves enough patience and understanding and saying, hey, I get to learn this just like everyone else. My hot mess array will not interfere with my ability to learn this, that the hot mess is actually really awesome, man.
Can I just add a quick little blurb with that? Not only the ability to learn, but I also feel like learning is not a linear thing. It's not something that we just we're here and we need to learn to here and we get there. It's so, I've probably used this before, so I apologize if I have, but I always feel like it's a corkscrew, like an upward corkscrew.
Yeah.
Where you go and you have to learn something deeper, which may mean that you kind of go backwards a little bit and you learn it deeper and in a different way. And then maybe you're able to get back, but actually you might have to go back down again and get deep into it. So even in that learning process, it's like not even just learning more, but it's learning deeper and learning better as well.
Yeah. And that's neurobiology as well. There has to be an exhaustion of the brain cell in order to create the pathway needed to get the ruts in your brain to have something be automatic. And that exhaustion has to come from a failure to understand. There's literally no way you can get around that. And Carol Dweck goes into that, so I'll link that book below too, Growth Mindset, because Roxy brought that into us. I want to hear a little bit. First of all, I'd love to hear from Sully, but I would also love to hear from Kristina.
Options are nice.
Sully seems to know a lot about empathy. So
I'm sure. Look at that. All the love.
I know. Sully's like, Mommy, I love you.
So for me, I had this experience that's just been in my head the whole time we've been talking, but I was like, I'm not sure if it perfectly fits with what we're talking about, but I feel like you guys set it up pretty nicely. So I'm like, okay, I think this will hopefully fit with our topic. So I won't go into too much detail because it's not my story to tell, but I have a friend that years ago was in a toxic relationship. And she, kept going back because there's a cycle. And a lot of times people go back multiple times. And as a friend that's seen this and been like, this relationship isn't good for either of you. Why do you keep going back? I see what this is doing to you and how it's hurting you. And, it's hard. And I was, trying to be the nice, supportive friend and give advice and tell them what I think they should do, but in a nice way, to help them see, this relationship you're in isn't good, because they weren't seeing it the way that I was seeing it. And not that my vision of it was perfect or anything, but, so I was trying to offer this help. And this friend did eventually get away from that relationship, but still years later has not been able to move past it in a way that I felt was still healthy. Like she'd easily get triggered and have emotional breakdowns and things that I didn't understand why it was still so hard. Which is hard. As a friend, you care for them, that it's like, I hate to see you going through this, but
why aren't you pulling yourself out of it?
Yeah. So, but she's made some, big progress in the last while. And we were talking about that, about where she is now versus where she was. And I feel like I have learned a lot just about myself and this type of relationship. And I've learned a lot just in the period of time I've been involved with the Empathy Council and the Reclaimers podcast about, being there for someone, but not telling them what to do and how these relationships work. And so as we were talking about it, I kind of had this moment where I was like, oh, even though I felt like I was doing the right thing and being and saying all the things I should, now I know better, and I'm not perfect, and I'm still learning, constantly learning about this stuff. But I apologized to her because I realized that, even though my intentions were good, maybe the way that I went about it was not always the best.
Yeah.
So it's going back to like, you know, you can think you're right, but handle things wrong. And one thing that I really liked in the TED Talk that stood out, I have it written down, so I'm just going to read it.
Please.
She said that trusting too much on the feeling of being right can be dangerous. The sense of being right is not a reliable guide to what's going on in the external world. You should be able to look out into the universe and say, wow, maybe I'm wrong. And it was kind of one of those, wow, maybe I was wrong. Intentions were good, but I was not completely right in how I went about it.
Yeah. I love the phrase, I was wrong. Because as she points out in the TED Talk, I am wrong. The moment you say I'm wrong, you actually are right about being wrong, so therefore you're not wrong. It's like this like tautology, like back and forth.
Like, brain.
Yeah, I know. I know. When she said that, and she says that joke, she actually says that in her book. And when I read it in the book, I read it as this very fierce woman, like shaming me. And then when I heard it in her voice, I heard the way that she sort of jokingly approached it. And I was like, I was even wrong about her tone when she's talking about being wrong. Right? And as I heard that, I realized what a joke it is for us to think that we could ever be right about anything. And that sounds really horrible because, you know, there are whole systems of like government and academia and all of these things that are built on the idea that we can be correct about certain things. And then I realized that one of the things that I used to teach my test students was we really do not have a reliable system for verifying information is correct. The only thing that we have a system for is saying, we were wrong about this. That's like the entire scientific method is being able to say, yeah, I was wrong. We were told, and we can prove something incorrect. We have real trouble proving that things are correct, though. The only thing that we can do is take a massive sample size and note that everybody has a very similar experience. So even in that, I think that there's a fluidity to the maybe I was wrong phrase, but I love the I was wrong because then it acknowledges that in this moment I have the opportunity to be correct. You know, that even that can live in there. Right.
I thought it was interesting. She said how, you know, we feel we are right and we have been put on this earth to bless other people with our rightness, and how everyone else is either like ignorant, stupid, or evil. I thought that
Or misinformed.
or misinformed. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting.
I think when we veer into the evil territory, like I think that believing that people are misinformed causes the least amount of harm. But I think that veering into evil territory, believing that other people are evil, I think that that's where we get into trouble.
But I think misinformed can even go there.
Oh, I don't think that needs to be.
Take us there. It's not very fast. It's not very far from, oh, they're wrong or they're misinformed to all of a sudden they're stupid because they don't get the right kind of information to they're stupid and they're bad and they're evil. I mean, it's not. You see it in politics all the time.
100%. And I think that there's a motive and intent there that I was trying to say. If I believe that someone is gleefully misinformed, then I see it as my job to inform them and then I make myself right. You know, like there's that. But if I believe that someone's evil, then I'm like sentencing them to death and things like that. And that's where I think the Spanish Inquisition comes in. So one is a misunderstanding and throwing things at the TV when I'm listening to certain news stations, and the other is, you know, invading whole countries and involving colonial privilege. But I agree, it's a very slippery slope between the two. The other thing that I think is a very interesting approach to this whole thing is what I'm hoping is that we can reframe being wrong a little bit to a common human condition. And the other piece that I really like about Catherine is that in studying this, she's like, you know, sort of like when Brene says, yeah, I am the foremost researcher on shame, people go, oh, they sort of back away from her, right? And when Catherine Schultz tells people what she does, it is my favorite thing to hear her talk about this because she says, you know, I love introducing myself. And she says, it's my job to study how wrong other people are. And then people are like, oh, okay. You know, like we're not going to have a really slick relationship here. Okay. we have had a lot of reframes. I just want to get some quick final thoughts. What's something that stood out to you that you would like to take with you this week to learn, relearn, fail at, be wrong about? What's something that you can aim for this week?
I want to say how much I love Roxy's. Did I just call you Roxy? Did I call you Roxy?
Call me Roxy.
Okay, good.
I call her Roxy all the
Okay,
time.
I don't know why I questioned that.
comfort level means a lot
Okay.
to me. So yes,
Well,
please.
I love you. Oh my God. I love Roxy's story about enjoying the falling down thing and rejoicing in it. And I think that is a beautiful skill that we can really develop is being really learning to be really okay with it. And then when we are wrong, when we fall down, if it has caused harm to a relationship or something like that, if, we have the ability to try to make amends a little bit and take ownership and repair where we can, that's a worthwhile thing. But I'd love to get better at teaching my children to rejoice in the falling down more and go, and recognizing that it's so not the end of the world, and I just finishing with one more thought. Like sometimes I will say, like, there's a perspective that we're not seeing. Once again, I'm reaching towards
to your lighting.
but like from the outside, how must it look from the outside as the universe or God or whatever you call the higher power that exists? Like they're looking at us, and when they see us tear each other apart or tear ourselves apart when one or both of us are wrong, like how much love and compassion must they feel, and how much a desire, they probably want to go, can I help you guys out? So if we can just remember that person's not judging and picking us apart and writing us off as evil and useless and all of those things, or that existence, that being, that power, that energy, like we have value, and we just got to learn to enjoy falling down and celebrate the learning that can come from it. It's so easy, right?
Oh, totally. Right.
It's so easy.
Yeah. It's awesome. Avoid the inquisition in my brain. Right. Okay.
One of the things that I'm taking away is, so I have this as a teaching philosophy in my classrooms, and I got it from Ken Bain. It's his pedagogy. And he talks about, this is in a book about what the best, is it college professors or something do? Anyway, what the best teachers do in their classrooms. And I adopted this so fast. It's to let the students, and I would say ourselves as well, because we are lifelong learners. I would say try, sometimes fail, receive feedback in a respectful, kind way, and then try again. So that's the thing that I do in my classroom, and that I would like to apply to myself. It's hard to be wrong, and it's hard to make mistakes, but to try. And, like in Roxy's story too, about the snowboarding, they're trying, like they're attempting to do it and to learn. And that's beautiful. And so creating that space, I think, involves empathy and compassion, and knowing that we are going to be making mistakes because we are human. So it's try, sometimes fail, receive feedback, and try again.
Mm-hmm. Simple. So easy to execute, right? I love that.
I really liked Becki's story and kind of identifying the feelings and what they are. So mini story. The other day, I ended up unexpectedly being on this phone call about returning this item, and my husband was there, and I wanted his help, like talking to the person, or like trying to work on this item to fix it, to see if we could fix it or we had to return it. And I was getting frustrated because he didn't know what I wanted, and I was trying to juggle telling him what I wanted his help on, being on the phone with this person and fixing this item, and I couldn't do it, and I was getting frustrated. And I was like, why don't you know what I want? Even though I couldn't articulate it. And I got angry. And when I got off the phone and everything, he was like, why were you like upset? And like we identified it, and I was like, I wanted your help, and you weren't anticipating my needs. And I apologized and everything, because I even in the moment of like the heat of my frustration, I knew I was wrong and that it wasn't his fault because he didn't know what I wanted. But I was still frustrated. So just being able to like be like, these are my feelings, this is why I feel this way, and it's not their fault. I am wrong for like getting to this level when it's not a big deal. And yeah, so kind of my takeaway is like, you can feel those feelings when you're wrong and identifying them. Yeah. So thank you, Becki, for sharing that.
Awesome. All right, Becki, Roxy.
I'll go. This is just, I love this topic so much. It's just a good reminder. Find a safe place to fail, to mess up, to be wrong. That's, I think a lot of us get into the situation where we're afraid to be wrong because we didn't have safe opportunities to be wrong growing up. We didn't have, even in school, you're graded, right? You get everything right and you get an A and you're a good person, or you mess things up and you get C's or D's or fail and you're a bad person, right? Like, that's not how it is, but that's how we've been trained. And so that's what we've internalized. And so if you don't give yourself safe spaces to be wrong, safe spaces to fail, then you never learn how to get out of that. And it becomes scary and worse and worse and worse. And it becomes this big monster that you're afraid to deal with. And so if you are afraid to be wrong, as I have been many times in my life, still am, find safe spaces to be wrong. Find little things that you're wrong about and just correct. Like, start really small, right? Like, if it's something like, oh, hey, I messed up, or, oh, I think about even in texting, right? How often do we misspell something and then send like little asterisks with a correction? That's a safe, that is a great example. If you have ever done that, you've proven to yourself that you can be wrong and you can correct it and you can keep going, right? And so find safe spaces to be wrong, find safe spaces to fail. And if you want to go snowboarding and do that, I will take you.
Wonderful. Hey, Becki.
Well, first I have to say, every time you choose these weekly things, it's like, dang it, now I'm going to have an experience that relates to this. Now I'm going to have to be wrong.
I'm Carl Junging all of you. I'm Carl Junging all of you.
No, really. I appreciate the ability to speak through applicable experiences and help me understand and recognize. The thought that I had was perspective. It went back to perspective when you shared, there's a slight difference, and it's a very important difference between I am wrong and I was wrong. And he was wrong and he is wrong, or that was wrong or that is wrong. And I think that's a really important thing to remember in this whole situation, is that perspective of, like we talked about, being okay with the fact that we are all going to be wrong at some point. Everyone's going to be wrong. And recognizing also that there are opportunities for safe places to be wrong. There are also going to be times when it's going to be hard and you're wrong, and it's not going to be like, oh, I just rolled down the hill on the snowboard. It's going to be like, this is a big wrong, and I think at those moments, if you can recognize that perspective of like, I recognize that, I'm now going to move forward in a way that will help me and others, that I think that can be the most helpful. Another thing that I think that helps me in this, or to like practice with this, is to try new things, first of all, because a lot of times you're going to fail with new things, and meet people that are different than you. Because a lot of times I find that my perspective was limited, and not necessarily like I am wrong, but I was wrong because my perspective was like this. And as I meet new people that I perhaps didn't know or don't have similar backgrounds to, or I try something different that is perhaps out of what is safe and fun right here, that allows me the opportunity to say like, oh, that's a perspective I had not considered. And I'm appreciative now that I can have that. And it almost helps me to see that I was wrong, and also to see that I don't have to be wrong in other ways, later. It almost prevents further heartache as well.
Yeah. All of these are incredible points. And I have been thinking about my communication professor, Heather Canary. She was the chair of the department for my all my communication. And I took 2 classes from her, and I was lucky enough to do that. It was in her class that I first discovered the communication theory that if you want to decrease anxiety, you increase communication. And as we talked about it, I realized that decreasing anxiety, that if I wanted to decrease the anxiety internally, I needed to increase my internal communication with myself, that I needed to speak to myself. And it was in the next class that she said, all communication is training. And I remember hearing that for the first time and thinking, oh my goodness, she's talking about me training myself. She's talking about how I train others. She's talking about how others train me. Like, all communication is training. And I just want to mention that there is, part of we have this empowering tools. And tool number 6 is the replacement tool. And all of you have mentioned this in one way or another today, finding a safe place to fail, finding a safe place to be wrong. And that doesn't always exist. And so it's important for us to find a replacement for that when we can't fail in a safe place in our everyday life, that we have friendship or we have a place to lean so that we can retell that story. And that story can then have a lot of compassion surrounding it, because our friends stood in as the judge and jury. Our friends stood in and said, I have compassion for you, and I'm going to have compassion for this because, Dianna, as you mentioned, that universe, the higher power, they don't have the arms to hug us. That's up to us. We have the arms to hug one another. We have the things to give one another, the compassion to share. So that is the thought that I want to give to everyone, but also to take away myself, that it's important to have those spaces that replace those areas where we can't get that compassion. So, because I know that there'll probably be people listening going, well, I don't really have friends that do that for me, or safe spaces to fail, like in my job or in my family or these other things. And that's where you do find these other people that can have that. So hopefully this is a part of that. I was hoping that as we started doing that, it certainly has been for me. That as I pick the topics, I want you guys to know that as I pick the topics, I also have the Carl Jung moment. Carl Jung said that when he learned a new principle or concept in psychology, it was like someone sent a telegram to all of his patients that they could now bring that issue to him. And that on top of that, he was suddenly capable of recognizing that issue in his own life. And so we're sort of doing that here. And that's a part of the replacement tool as well, that we're saying we are going to recreate the obstacles in an easy to digest way so that we can move forward. Yes, Lindsay, go for it. You're muted.
Yes. Okay.
There we go.
So I just wanted to say too that if we have some listeners too who are like, I really want to have friends who can be that support for me. And also I'm feeling really lonely that I don't have friends I can reach out to. Mm-hmm. That would be a really isolating place. And I feel like saying again that self-compassion can be a huge tool there, that we can be that support and that safe place for ourselves. But like you said, it takes training. That kind of communication takes training, and that, like you said it so beautifully, like you're internally doing that for yourself. And I think that is where self-compassion can come in, that self-care to fill up our buckets or our fuel tanks or whatever we want to say. But we can be that kind, loving, compassionate source, safe space for ourselves. When we look out and we're like, I don't see it anywhere that I can have this, we can do that for ourselves.
Yes. Yes. If you're here listening and you are seeking empathy, I promise you can do that for yourself.